There we are. Yep, got you. Thank you.
Right. There we go. Okay. Now, this is really based on a book I've almost got ready to bring out, which in itself is based on the series which I've been doing about the last 18 months in Greenwich Deptford down here, which is the beginning of Greenwich. It's the Greenwich Ocean boundary to the yacht club around here. And I've abandoned going any further through Charlton, despite a great deal of pressure from people in Charlton. And I've started doing Deptford Creek instead, but that won't be in the book. The book is just this bit of Riverside, and it goes along site by site by site. Now, if I did that as a talk, I mean, I would be here for the next 6 weeks, because going site by site by site is a very long way round to do it. So I've sort of sliced it, and I've taken some themes from the Riverside, just to talk generally about the Greenwich Riverside and some of the things on it, and to try and explain it a bit. One of many, many snips you're going to get from Google Maps, and saying that this is the area we're looking at, and we're only looking at it and are able to look at it because at some point in the engineering, which took place right up and down the Thames, at a time we just don't know. I mean, people say, oh, it was the Romans, because the Romans are supposed to have done everything like that. What we do know is that the Greenwich Marsh, which is the peninsula, was very much re-engineered, if you like, in the 15th and 16th centuries, thing which I think is not basic, that we don't think about with South London. We've got the river and the riverside. And from the river, the hills come quite steeply up to a ridge. And the A2, the Roman road, runs along that ridge. And that hillside, if we could see it now without the houses, it's full of holes. I mean, vast pits. Maysville Station's in a pit. There's another one the other side of the motorway. We had a talk a couple of months ago about the ones in West Greenwich. And this is chalk and gravel extraction. And a lot of it is going into the ships, bringing coal down as ballast to take them back, as well as, of course, for things like road building and so on. So that's a bit of basic looking at the Riverside, what we're looking at. And I thought I would say about the peninsula. Historically, it's Greenwich Marsh. It was like a sort of private area fenced off from the rest of Greenwich. It's very, very fussy, obviously, about its walls, about the embankments which retain the land. And I put there here, it's the only picture I've got of the 1920s, and it's somewhere up near Blackwall Point. And the other map is one I did many years ago. In, I think this is the 17th century, it doesn't make much difference. Red, the bright red, ownership plots, they're all in Warden College. And it wouldn't be that different now, although I know they claim to have sold it. The thing is that because of a great deal of history, some of which I'll touch on, to do with structure of the manor, of the East Greenwich Manor and Old Court and so on, which I'm not going to begin to talk about, The ownership of much of the marsh, in fact, a lot of Greenwich, tends to be in the hands of charities rather than individual ownerships. So among those ownerships is not only the vast majority of Magdalen College, but Hackcliffe Charity's got some, Trinity College. There's another charity from Farningham in there as well, and various others. So it's corporate ownership. And of course, this corporate ownership extends also to West Greenwich, which of course Magdalen College also owns quite a bit of, where you've got a majority site ownership really by Greenwich Hospital. So we're looking at an area which is charity corporate body owned. Now, I'm looking at an early industry, looking at fish. We have an early fishing area. I've got here Billingsgate Dock, and I don't know how many people realise that Billingsgate Dock is bizarrely in Greenwich. And like Billingsgate Dock that we know about in the city, it was dedicated to the fishing industry. And here we have Fisher Alley, which ran across the top of Billingsgate. And this is one of the Riverside roads, which I put in the book. It's all pubs. And it's now, of course, obliterated and undercut. It's art gardens. And I put Julie's book, and are you there, Julie? Hello. That's about the fisherman a bit further along. He's not involved in Billingsgate. So we had traditionally, I would say it's important to realise with Greenwich fishing, it's not about the river. The river is fished by fishermen from Barking, shellfish fished by, and the other thing further down, which makes a big difference to the Greenwich Riverside, this is the drawings above which turned out not to be by Hawksmoor, which is subject of, and they are all about the Ghent ownership of Greenwich, that the manors of Greenwich given to the Ghent Abbey by one of King Alfred's daughters. Now, below that we have the tide mill, which turned up in 2002 on what was then called Greenwich Wharf. It's now under Riverside Gardens. We had a report when the first lot of archaeology took place. What has happened since, I don't know. It's not for want of trying to know. The archaeologists keep saying they're bringing something out. And we say to them, well, okay, you sent a lot of the previous stuff up to York. Where is it? And they don't say. And they also don't say what findings they have of the mill itself, if it was a tide mill, except that their timber expert has some very interesting things to say about the difference between carpentry and woodwork and how you can date it. Now, tide mills, and I'll come to this in a minute because it's not the only one on the Greenwich Riverside, are about industry. They're heavy duty, they're shoving stuff through. And we've also got to take in that the manor of Greenwich and, of course, the Ghent ownership took us right the way down here to Cowden and Edenbridge and various manors here, which were and this is the Kentish den system, and I'm not going to go on about it. In Kent, you have dens which belong to some of the more populated riverside areas. I'm hunting out something which I've got no proof of and which it would be wonderful to find some proof of. But of course, 200 years after Greenwich is supposed to have owned this area, it was the, where are we? It was the centre, the major centre for the whole of England of ironworking. And I would so love to link up with, again, ownership with ironworking in the Weald. I live in hope, but it's a 200 years out hope. The other thing is that if you try and do it, the main road from Cowden up to Greenwich, it's quite clear that they go to Ballast Quay rather than what we would now see as central Greenwich. So something else on the riverside is this sort of power in the Middle Ages, the early Middle Ages. Right, so we have a stretch of river which is part of the book, which is not including the marsh, which is just what we see as the Greenwich Riverside. And we have here, up here, by where the Cutty Sark is now. Whoops, where's my cursor gone? We have a little fishing village. Up here, we have a more industrial site with the Ghent office. Oh, let's go mad. With the Ghent offices on site on what is now Ballast Quay. Then along in the late medieval period, somebody comes along and plonks a palace in between them. And that's what we call Greenwich. I think it's important to realise, if you're looking at industries, the palace is an industry on its own. You think of the courtiers, the civil servants, the ambassadors, the goodness knows who, they've all got to be found somewhere to sleep. Their servants have got to have somewhere to sleep. You've got a pile of admin all the time. You've got to feed them. You've got to service them in every way, entertainment and whatever. There's going to be in these areas which are servicing this huge political centre. And I will mention, of course, perhaps I should mention it now, down here, there was a stretch of what we call courtiers' houses, but they're people who I would really describe as senior civil servants. And we've got a bit of, the Dean of Wells is one of them, and they've just uncovered a vast great palace he had in Wells. So goodness knows what he had along here. I mean, he was basically in charge of the civil service, I suppose, under both Richard III and Henry VII. But anyway, John Gunthorpe. Look him up under Wells Cathedral. It's amazing. You wouldn't believe what his palace was like. And a monk. You think monks live quite simple lives, don't you? So that's the shape of Greenwich over the centuries. Now, if we're looking at the various facilities on the river, the oldest river access points we've got are the Waterman's Stairs. Waterman's Stairs are licensed. There's Act of Parliament covered them, although Act, which I think does something to their status, but I'm not sure, and we're grateful to know that. They are basically ran as sort of taxi service. In fact, apparently the London taxi rules are based on Waterman's rules. The licensed waterman could come to these stairs and pick you up and take you wherever you went, obviously for a fee. So the ones we're looking at, garden stairs here, which are right beside Greenwich Pier, very ancient. They're the ones in all the pictures, the famous pictures of Cutty Sark Gardens before it was Cutty Sark Gardens. Probably date from the 14th, maybe earlier centuries, were once called Skern Stairs, and they're very much still there, and they connected with Billingsgate. Along here in Ballast Quay, there's Golden Anchor Stairs, and you can guess their age from the fact that the Golden Anchor pub was pulled down 200 years ago. They've somehow kept the name. And here we've got Trinity College. Whoops, sorry again. To my touch and it goes over. Trinity College stairs, which as you can see are derelict. But they were not the only ones. There was ship stairs and others which have gone. So let's look at these. This is this is along by the Trafalgar Tavern, and they're the last ones you get to on a 5-foot walk. And the Lower Royal Hospital stairs, they've been there a long time. This is one of the famous Canaletto pictures of Greenwich. And although, whoops, you can't see them very well, but there they are. There's the stairs. And they were then called crane stairs. And that's the crane, after which Crane Street is named. And that would have been there to help unload supplies for the Royal Hospital and for that the palace at this supply point from ships or boats or whatever you had. And that was also a major landing place for visitors to the palace and the Royal Hospital, who weren't quite grand enough to be able to go to the main Watergate. And we have the Watergate. And this is the grand entrance, which you would have had to the Royal Palace and subsequently the Royal Hospital. And people who ask what the plaque is on the gates, of course, it's the Royal Hospital Arms. Now, I became, whilst I was doing this, quite intrigued by the Watergate. I mean, we tend to use the Watergate as a word. We don't use stairs or whatever. It's a Watergate. And the only other Watergate I can quickly think of is the York Watergate, which is down near Embankment Station and marooned up in a park. And that was the gate to York House. But I thought we've got the bit of Deptford, which is in Greenwich, which is basically Borthwick Street. And it goes from Upper Watergate to the creek. Now, why I keep thinking to myself, is that called Upper Watergate? A bit further along, and you can't see it, it's gone, is Middle Watergate. And then where the Ahoy Centre is Lower Watergate. So why, in this very down market bit of Deptford, have we got 3 Watergates? And is it a grand word, or am I just dreaming it's a grand word for something important? I do know when I was researching that area for the Greenwich Weekender, that I was getting all sorts of amazing things. I mean, and I'll come to some of them in a minute, but that there had been something there. There was something that was there, which, I mean, the archaeologists actually found things that were interesting, like a dovecot on the water's edge, all sorts of stuff. And that before the 17th century, there was something there, something grand. And I guess it was offices or nice houses for the first people running the Royal Dockyard. That's a guess. But there don't seem to be any histories of Deptford that I found that take the smallest bit of interest in that. Right, piers. Now I'm describing piers as things which transport people from the land to wherever they want to go by water. So clearly we've got Greenwich Pier, which is famous and busy. Famous and busy. I did quite a bit of research into the history of Greenwich Pier, and I'll be very interested if anybody else has, as I've not seen anything. Like a lot of this stretch of Greenwich, it is very largely concerned with aggravation from the watermen and the various ferry company owners throughout the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. Greenwich Pier appears to have been built originally by people from the Royal Hospital. Whether it was actually built by the Royal Hospital, I'm not sure. And the watermen promptly plonked down a rival pier next to it. I mean, it's awful. There's fights and things. This goes on all the time. Anyway, Greenwich Pier. We also now have the QE Pier, or North Greenwich it's called, which serves the Clippers, built for the Clippers in 2000 or 1998, and built on the site and the foundations of the East Greenwich Gas Works jetty. Something else I will come to in a moment. And then we have something I never knew about until about 2 years ago. And that is the remains of East Greenwich Steamship Pier. And a lot of people got interested in it and went walking along the foreshore. And there's no sign of it on the foreshore. And we think that must have been because it was a floating pier. And I'm aware that people still got an interest in floating piers. I know somebody was trying to buy Charing Cross Pier in order to put Greenwich Pier out of business only 15 years ago. But the This East Greenwich steamship pier didn't last very long. As you can see, it's opposite the harbour master's house. This wall here, that is the back of the potting shed in the Ballast Quay Gardens, and is thought to have been the ticket office for the pier. But I mean, it's gone, and the railings there are probably the only reminder of it, except that they match the railings over here on the harbour master's house. Jetties, and I think of jetties as being commercial. They're about workplaces, and I haven't done, if I get to it before I run out of things to say, wharfage, but jetties are part of that, really. We're just looking at what we've got and other bits and pieces. Right down at the Deptford stretch, we've got the massive and unused Deptford Power Station jetty. I don't know, maybe someone from Deptford can tell me if anything is going on there, but I have no reason to believe anything is, except there are some mysterious sort of box things underneath it. You can't see in this photograph. Absolute waste.
Last time I
really.
went past there, Mary, there were lots of warnings about not approaching it because it was a dangerous structure.
Okay.
That's Deptford Pier, Deptford Power Station Pier. It looks like it's really dangerous.
But what? Okay. I'd be grateful if people could write things rather than say them to me. All right, we go again. The next one along is the Greenwich Power Station jetty, which is also massive and unused. I think that I will rant from time to time about the inadequacy of the Greenwich tourist offer, but this is a great structure, and I mean, the views from the top must be incredible. And it's just sitting there not used at all for anything, as far as I can see. And it could be such a big asset along the riverside if someone had the imagination and could get it, prize it away from TfL, which may not be easy, of course. Right, and then we come right along to Enderby's. Enderby's is quite a complicated site. This wonderful photograph, which I've used over and over again, which we took from the now removed sales office. There is the big jetty here, whoops, where is it? Here, which has got on it the cable apparatus and so on here and here. It did have at one time a repeater on it. It's owned by, Alan would tell me off because I'm not quite sure if Alcatel still exists, but whoever's in the factory, they own it. And it's supposed to be in reasonably good condition. A lot of people have tried to think of, tea rooms and what have you, but nothing has happened. The bottom picture here shows a meeting, part of one of the seminars we had as the Enderby group to try and get proper historical analysis of the site and some sort of recognition of it when if ever Enderby House became a pub, which it has, and it doesn't recognise anything that we said at all at any of these events. There's some quite well-known Greenwich historians in that picture, and also the chap who's no longer there, who was the director at Brunel. And I can see the back of a developer there in Marcello, who now works for Warden Wharf. There is also at Enderby's this smaller jetty, which has grassed. It was grassed over in 2002 by groundwork as part of a big project they did. And the groundwork is something I could come back to, maybe if I get time. And the other thing about Enderby's, this is a photograph showing, clearly it's not modern. Here is a gate, which was the outlet for Bendish Sluice, which is one of the Tudor drainage ditches on the peninsula, draining out to the river here. It doesn't seem to be there anymore, which is a bit worrying because the water must be still there in the marsh. It was there until Barrett's took over. I'm told they've done something with it, but I don't know what. Alongside it are these steps, going down to the river. And until the cable ships stopped coming, there was a ferry there which would row people out to the cable ship, which is down here. That's the John H. Mackay, which was there for many years. But there were bigger and much more modern vessels at Enderby Wharf than that ship, which was kept as a museum piece, really, with stories that it was only ever painted on one side. When the Queen came down the river, they painted the side she could see. So you would be ferried out to here if you want to be on the cable ship. The steps, and there's another very bad picture of him here, have on them a history of cable, which again dates from the groundwork remediation work along the riverside, commissioned by Carol Kenner. I have got a video of their installation, which I'm not going to drag out now. If anybody's interested, I have got that. Right, the next jetty along is the E-shaped one, which is large jetty for the Metropolitan Borough of Greenwich. It's owned by the Wharf people in the 40s. Pitos, which were held grain for the Amalum sugar refinery, glucose refinery. They were demolished by a French demolition crew that came down one day, didn't introduce themselves to anybody, didn't tell the council, the PLA, or anybody they were there, and proceeded to blow up the silos with neither a by your leave or thank you to anyone. I mean, Alcatel were extremely annoyed. So it put several days' production out with the vibrations. So the other thing I was going about the silos is to quote Owen Hatherley, the architectural correspondent who used to live over the chip shop in Trafalgar Road, who would have described them, who did describe them as structures which would make Courvoisier weep with envy. So we've lost an artwork possibly. And then Primrose Jetty, which was a fairly standard sort of commercial jetty, and that's in use in the 1950s. There's the little thing that went with it, advertising that it's on the Greenwich Meridian, which I must have got some doubts about, but still. And it was done up again by Groundwork as a feature which people could visit. They could go and sit on it, there were seats and some information. And that's all been removed by the developers, who are doing goodness knows what with it. And then next one, Ordnance Jetty, which is up on was the gasworks site. It's the bottom. It's called Ordnance because it was built for the Ordnance Company, and there's one of the cannon they made on site. This clearly isn't the same jetty, so I guess it must have been rebuilt by the gas company, who had their ordnance tar works here. And I put this in because I can't resist it. I mean, it's clearly a nasty accident. The structure which has collapsed was called a Temperley transporter. And I don't know why it collapsed in a storm, I think. The edge here is a very large dry dock, which may or may not be under the dome. Again, when I asked the archaeologists, did you find the dry dock? They said, oh, I don't know. There's a lot of concrete down there. So I don't know. And it's almost finally, the East Greenwich Gasworks Jetty, major structure built from the 1880s. Because it was a gasworks, it wasn't electric. So the whole thing, I don't know how it worked, but there was no electricity on that jetty. And it was supposed to be completely silent. And again, not that old, I mean, 1880s. And the only bit left of it is the bit that, right along the end here, which Quantum Cloud is sitting on. And then we have the jetty, which is run by a community interest group. I'm not sure of its actual legal status. It run as a nursery and a restaurant, and they have all sorts of events there. And there was a theatre on there for a while. It's the old jetty from the Blackwall Point Power Station. Again, only dates from the 1940s. Good condition, used for something positive. And I was going to say, I think it's a pity that some of these others haven't got something similar on them, like the two power station jetties, other power station jetties, would have been something like this, which is getting a lot of community in, as well as the artists and so on. And finally, Greenwich Yacht Club, who are on Pear Tree Wharf, which was planning gain to Greenwich Council. As far as I know, Greenwich Council owns this site. Built English partnerships to shut up Greenwich Yacht Club, which was complaining that it was being put out of business by the Dome. So that's a very, very quick run round the various jetties we've got. And I thought I'd better put in the two draw docks. This is, didn't take it last night. I clipped this out of Google last night, and I'm sorry for these horrid little things they put all over it. This is the draw dock at the end of Eastney Street. This building here, which I will come back to, the Three Crowns Pub, and it was the predecessor of the Harbour Master's House. And this is the corner of Crane Street. The draw dock seems to have been used, I don't know about its original use, but by the 19th century, it was very largely being used, as it is now, for sort of sporting reasons. There was a big boat hire business there for many years. It was letting boats out for rowers, very largely. And there is, of course, just a couple of doors along here, the Greenwich Rowing Centre, and I put the Curlew Club up. It says founded 1866, and there's also a couple of other clubs in there, equally old, started mainly as factory workers, leisure pursuits, factory clubs, and have become now the Greenwich Rowing Centre. And going further up Crane Street towards the Trafalgar, the yacht is there, and of course the yacht club started in the yacht, and the yacht also had a number of other rowing clubs and sporting clubs and so on there, as did the Trafalgar. I mean, don't think the Trafalgar's old, by the way. There's a lot of hooey about Nelson. So the other draw dock is the Ordnance draw dock, which is more or less shut off with horrid signs everywhere, with no trespassers and what have you. It's right on the side of the posh hotel down there, and if it's built as planning gain, they didn't call it planning gain in those days, but in the 1880s, as a condition for Greenwich, East Greenwich Gasworks getting permission to close bits of the riverside off, they were required to build this draw dock. And you're supposed to draw your boats up. If you would take a vehicle down there to draw your boat up, you'd probably be arrested by the security men. And I don't think it's a good situation for something which is a public right of way to be so surrounded by security. Down here is it before all that happened, a bit of a mess. This building here on the side, which of course is now gone, is Joe Jacubate's shipbuilding, boat building business, busily building boats there until relatively recently. I was told on the internet that he was the brother-in-law of the last woman hanged in Britain, but never mind. The other thing which is there is the Blackwall Tunnel, the old tunnel vent, which was built originally as a staircase entrance so that you could walk down to the tunnel and walk through. That was closed many years ago. There is a fascinating, absolutely fascinating piece of video from the people who've turned it into a ventilation system, explaining how it will open like a flower if there's a fire in the tunnel, and in order to get all the smoke and whatever out. And that, I really would recommend watching it because it does open like a flower. You wouldn't believe it. Right, to move on quickly because the time's going and I know I won't get to the end of this. Right, now a lot of the river side in Greenwich is about generating power for population of East South London and for workplaces and so on. I've already talked a bit about tide mills. I'm not going to go into detail about tide mills, I just haven't got time. If you want to know about them, go through the tunnel, go up till you see the Tesco. The back of the Tesco, you'll find 3 mills. It's open, I think, the first Sunday of every month. The mill, which is down here, is enormous, absolutely enormous tide mill. It was working until the 1940s by the power of the River Lee when it was bombed. And to take it in is quite something, actually. It's an amazing thing. If you think that this is something run by a relatively small river, which, as I said, could be an industrial production now. I mean, it's very, very surprising. So the tide mills along the river, you've got the 12th century one here, which is just talked about. You've got one here, which was built in the very early 1803, 19th century, which I've written extensively about. And if you want to know about it, I can give you my bibliography. If you want to know the official version and look at what the archaeologists found there, you will find they found nothing. Even though the mill is on the Ordnance Survey map, they said there was nothing on the site of any interest. And that is the report which will go into the archive as what was there, not my extensive research, which includes things like Brian Donkin's personal diary, what he said about it, and various other things. Never mind that. And we also have, possibly, this isn't on that, up at Deptford, the Middle Watergate, a tide mill. I don't know anything about it. It is mentioned by the late Christopher Philpotts. And Julian Watson says to me, well, if Christopher Philpotts said it, it's probably right. But I don't know what his source is for it, unfortunately. But it's a good site to have one. And then we have coal. The whole of the Greenwich Riverside is about coal, really is. It's about coal coming in to power all of this stuff. And I keep bleating on about the river. So you look out, there's nothing on, it's a couple of clippers, waste of time. That river used to be full of boats. And a lot of the boats would, of course, have been colliers, boats bringing coal in and servicing the industries which ran on coal. So here we have a traditional collier, a sailing collier, coming down the vicious east coast, all sorts of horridness on the way. I mean, in the Middle Ages, there were quite a few sort of pirates about, and some of the little towns down there had various extortion rackets going on, I think you should call it. I put in here Pelton Colliery, which is in Durham. Most of the coal coming in this part of London came from Durham. Pelton, as you know, Pelton Road is called after it. Actually, a couple of years ago, went to find the site, which is now a golf course, and very respectable. Quite a nice restaurant. And then they would be taken to the Staithes. Here it is at Hetton by a huge network of railways. Again, I've got a lot of information about this, and taken down to London on what could be really hair-raising journeys. I mean, I've got stories from about the gasworks colliers, I mean, in the 1920s, which make your hair stand on end, about what it was like coming down that east coast. And in the Great War, I mean, you hear about miners and you hear about factory workers. You don't hear about sailors on these collier ships coming and going twice a week. And the ones in the Great War had been, you know, wrecked, torpedoed, pulled out of the water, dried off, got another boat to be wrecked again and dried off, and so on. Oh, it's horrific. The gas company, the East Greenwich Gasworks, lost its fleet of colliers twice over with the torpedoes. Anyway, neither here nor there. The collier ships are coming down in their hundreds. Betsy Cairns, a traditional one. Less traditional, she isn't, I'm afraid. I put a collier ship in from hated Beckton across the river, Mr. Thurm. And there's also this complex, again, it's not in the area I've been looking at, it's in Charlton, which is Atlas, which is a huge, great sort of boat thing with lots of other bits of boats, and it's transshipping coal from the collier ships into barges, and it must have clanked away all night. And if anybody complains about the noise from the river, they should try to be near that. It is, of course, what Atlas and Derrick Gardens are named after. So here we have the harbour master's house. And that was part of a regulatory system that collier ships coming in had to register at Tilbury. And there was a little building still at Tilbury too, where this was done. It's all done with flags. No wireless in those days. And we talk now about barrier control, and that they can take these huge cruise liners up. But the control system started a long time before the barrier. The harbour master's house would somehow be able to liaise with Tilbury, and they would make sure that the colliers were kept in what was called tiers, only allowed to go to the wharf when they were told they could. And as I said, the predecessor to this is the Three Crowns pub a bit further up by Crane Street. So coal was where? The Deptford Creek area. And this is an article I did 2 weeks ago for Greenwich Weekender. But there's a whole lot of coal wharves up here. What's interesting, I discovered that some of the daily papers, local papers, would have listed down which colliers were in and which were going and how much the coal on them was worth. There's a few more around Billingsgate down here. And of course, the big Coles Charles complex, which was brought in on Borden College in the mid-19th century, and many others, but those are the concentrations. But I'm running out of time, hardly gone anywhere. And these are all the things that coal would have been fueling. And starting off here, and I won't go through all these, they're obvious to locomotives and things. Copperas, which was a big 16th century, 17th century industry in Deptford. And the first mention of making coke, and by coke I don't mean drinks stuff, I mean stuff that's made from coal. The first mention of it nationally is in Deptford in connection with the copperas industry and with the heat needed to fire the long-term, they used to have to boil this stuff for a week. Coal is firing all of this. And we come to the gasworks. Now, I'm not going to go on about gasworks. I've missed out the first gasworks in Greenwich, which was the Norway Street one, which was minute. It's a very nice picture here, which I've only just discovered, of the Phoenix Works, which was on the Waitrose site down in Greenwich, West Greenwich. And that was owned by the Phoenix Company. And it supplied gas reliably and quietly to Greenwich and a lot of South London for nearly 100 years. And we know almost nothing about the site. I've had awful difficulty writing anything very much about it at all, except that I know it existed. And I found one of the gas holder tanks down there before the developers got in. And then we have the massive East Greenwich Works, built in the 1880s for George Livesey as a showpiece. I mean, the aspirations of perfection that went into East Greenwich were astonishing. This picture is, of course, a complete lie. As I always point out when I put it out, it's impossible, and it makes it look as though the gasworks fills up the entire peninsula, which it didn't. But it was supposed to be an example of the best gasworks practice possible internationally, and people that worked down there were very proud of it. And I think it's a pity that now it just gets slagged off for being full of pollution. Never mind. There's something I'm going to go on about, not at length, but which I get quite annoyed about. This is about Greenwich's offer to visitors. Cradle of Power. This is Deptford Power Station. Of course, there were small power generating plants generating power to one building. So along came Sebastian Ferranti, 23 in that picture. He had been one of these sort of child, what's the word of it, geniuses, and had been taken on trained in electrical engineering by Siemens Woolwich. And he comes up here at the age of 23 and he builds the first power station in the world. And it's Deptford, and that's it there. Of course, Deptford went on. He left Deptford quite soon after building it. It was supplying power to the railways as industry, and it became, in due course, with 2, 3 other extensions to it, the biggest power station in London. But I'm stressing this. It's the first proper generating station in the world. You go down there to look round, and will you see anything about it? No. You'll see a ridiculous statue of Peter the Great in the wrong place. And beside it, there's a little tiny notice which says Ferranti Green, for a little bit of green space, about 2 inches square. And that is the only mention of Ferranti. And there is nothing else. And I think it's beyond disgraceful. I mean, it's going on and on about it. What do we think we're doing? Showing people a blasted ship which was built in Scotland and going on and on about it and ignoring this and, of course, all the stuff on Enterbis. That's just disgraceful. So, other power stations, Blackwall Point, I've already mentioned their jetty. It's quite an ordinary, privately run local power station. Nothing, that's the second one on site, which I remember well. I remember seeing the chimney struck by lightning, but it was nothing extraordinary. But what we do have as well, which is extraordinary, is Greenwich Power Station. I know a lot of people don't like it, but by the London County Council for the trams, the architect designed, if they took those oil tanks and things away, it would look quite good. It's a great building. It's probably the oldest power station in Europe, certainly, which is still at work, and it's still essentially, I mean, no, it's not powering the trams, but it's powering a bit of the underground. So it's essentially doing the job it was built for. Something else we should be proud of, this old, very old and very good looking power station. And I would also just remind people of the lecture GIHS had from Graham Dolan, which revealed that all the stuff about the chimneys is probably untrue, and that some of the pictures we were all putting up and saying, look, here's a picture of the chimneys, are fakes. But never mind that. Oh, how long have I got? Not much, and I've got 1,000 slides left. Shipbuilding. Greenwich isn't really part of the classic East London shipbuilding industry. We want to think the shipbuilding in East London in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries is world class. I mean, it's probably the biggest concentration of shipbuilding in the world. It's enormous, and it's building some really classy vessels. But Greenwich is at the end of that. We've got a little bit of it left in this tiny Deptford bit where the East India Company, and I'll come to that in a minute, is building something. Then we've got a little bit of small-scale shipbuilding here. The big one is Maudsley down here. Coulton is a joke. And Stockwell and Lewis are basically leaking themselves over from here where they've got their main works. So, Deptford, shipbuilding in Deptford. We have the first East India Company vessel before they even thought they were going to take the whole world over and have their own army and various other things. They were quite humble. But Charles I came down and launched a ship. I'm not sure exactly where it was built, but it was somewhere in that bit of Greenwich, of Deptford. It could have been at what was called Stone Wharf, we now call Paynes Wharf, or it could have been on the dockyard, or it could have been on the later site, which was taken over by General Steam. Classic London shipbuilder Barnard from Ipswich were also in that area, building, big, usually on commission. There were several of these shipbuilders. It wasn't just Barnard; they're the big ones, but they are taking on commissions to build warships and all sorts of funny things like bomb ships and fire ships from the dockyard, the Royal Dockyard, and also from commercial people want to build, commercial ships. Charles Lungley here, who also had a shipyard on that site quite late. I'm fascinated that Lungley apparently actually was the administrator who oversaw the building of Great Eastern, Brunel's Great Eastern, over the other side of the river at Millwall Ironworks. And he had a very interesting shipyard here, doing lots of interesting things. I can't find a single thing published about him. I went to a lecture once, but the lecturer never ever published his findings. And then at the end, on the corner of Deptford Creek, we've got General Steam, which is also a very, very interesting company, with lots of small steamships doing all sorts of very unromantic jobs. big fleet, all being serviced from this site, and also the big tripper ships. And certainly me, coming from Gravesend, was very aware the Royal Daffodil was in all our lives. Coming further down very quickly, on Greenwich, this is again, it's a dreadnought wharf, both of these, in what used to be called Wood Wharf. Joyce, who unfortunately did a lot of interesting work, built a very interesting and innovative steam engine, died at the age of 42. And there's a whole saga, which I'm not going into, about his bankruptcy. And Rennie, who is the two sons of the famous John Rennie, and I have got to write an article about them next week, and I know nothing at all except that it was called Rennie's. They were on Dreadnought, and they eventually ended up at Wivenhoe. Right, coming down to the peninsula. This is the really interesting one. It's very late. Maudsley Son and Field, called after the grandchildren of the famous Henry Maudsley, Woolwich-born Henry Maudsley. Alan, you better yell at me when you want to stop. They built, I mean, I can't go into all the details of the side, it's Beowulf. They built quite a upgrade. This is the Lady Derby, which was their first ship, which is a very standard collier, called after the Prime Minister's wife. They then built these two very big and very interesting fast clippers, which were commissioned by Cutty Sark's owner, and they were Cutty Sark's rivals, Blackadder and Halloween. We've got to remember that, well, fastest ship in the world or whatever, that there's a lot of these ships, some of them American, some are British, and they're built in the age of steam. They're light, they're taking light cargoes, and they're nipping about at ridiculous speeds. But when they say with the fastest, it's trips. This one is the fastest, say from Shanghai to Deal. This one will be the fastest one from somewhere else to somewhere else. And they, all of them, held records for one trip or another. There's very dramatic stories about Blackadder. I would recommend reading. I've done quite a bit about several articles and talks and lectures and all sorts of things about the Maudsley site. And David Ramsden has done a third of a book on Halloween. The other thing which they built, which I think is extremely interesting, is the first Ro-Ro. There were two of these, and roll on, roll off. They're built for the Bosphorus, and they was commissioned by the Turkish government, and spent their lives going backwards and forwards across the Bosphorus. First lot, you can't beat the Turks with being a military, whatever. When the Ottoman objected, they sent gun carriages over. But actually, in this here, you probably can't see, but right down in this bottom corner are the Turkish gentlemen in Turkish dress. They're the Turkish naval architects come to discuss their contracts. But anyway, the two ships, Suhelet was taken out of commission in the 1940s. Sahadet, built in Greenwich in 1871, kept going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And then at some point in the 1970s, she was taken out of service and turned into a commercial steamer. And she was up and down the coast with all sorts of jobs until the late 1990s when she was fire on board. Now, what happened after that fire, I don't know. I mean, almost certainly she was hulked, destroyed. But there's somehow in our minds that somewhere on the Anatolian coast is the hull of a ship built in Greenwich in 1871, which was still at work in the 1990s. Very quickly, into shipbuilding Stockwell and Lewis. That's the Bill Dry Dock, which is now under the dome, which the archaeologists couldn't find. There's a ship built there called the Bully. There was a lot of ships built there, actually, but the Bully is a wreck which is dived in Tasmania. Courtney, I don't think Courtney built anything. It came to be a shipbuilder, but he built a yard and no ships. Again, this is all in detail in my Greenwich weekend articles. Marine engineering comes from shipbuilding and coal, of course. I put the Warrior in because she's now a showboat, at Portsmouth, and a tourist attraction, built as the ultimate deterrent just across the river on Bow Creek. Her pen engines are replicas, but I'm stressing this, that the pens are the world-class, internationally supreme marine engine builders based in Blackheath Hill, but who had their boiler shop at what we now call Payne's Wharf. And next door, but one to Payne's Wharf, was Humphrey, Tennant and Dykes, who were Penn's big rivals. And there's one of their great big engines that they built for huge, great warships and what have you. Thames barges taking heavy haulage down the river. The Spritsail barge, most developed on the Thames, very sophisticated, very interesting. And what have we got? Greenwich built Spritsail barges. Giralda said to be the fastest barge ever built for pipers on the Greenwich waterfront garden side. Veronica built by Shrubsail. Her hulk is down at Bedlam's Bottom. Orinoco, now I'm going to go very, no, wait a minute, I've got time. Orinoco is still in sail, and she's built by Hughes, a Providence Wharf, again on the Greenwich Riverside garden side. And here's one of the big things. I usually start off by saying, tell me when you think the last ship was built on Greenwich Peninsula. And I'm sure people have seen Elizabethan. I just put her in because she's 1981. But the last one we know about is New Orleans here, built in 1991 by Joe Jacobates. As I said, I rang up Joe and said, can you tell me about it, Joe? Because I mean, even 1991 I was doing this. And he says, can't help you now, love. Bailiffs is here. But ferries, I didn't mean to put this in. We've got a number of ferries. Upper Watergate traditional ferry, this amazing steam ferry, which there's considerable remains of at Wood Wharf. Nobody knows what they are because nobody tells them. It's not a placard, not anything, but stuff you can actually see. And then there's the secret ferry, which goes over to Trinity Buoy Wharf. Right. River services, I'm nearly there. Tilbury contracting and dredging, that's quite interesting. I've only found out about it quite recently. When I wrote the Orinoco up, I'd been persuaded to do so by Jim Hughes, who had died while he was doing research. And I finished the research. I wrote about the Orinoco, been built by Hughes at Providence Wharf on the site of what's now Greenwich Waterfront Gardens. And then I realised they'd moved to Dreadnought Wharf and turned themselves into Tilbury contracting and dredging. And it was only years and years later, when I was doing the research for the Weekender job, that I discovered that Tilbury Contracting and Dredging became a big organisation which still exists, called Interserve, which provides river services internationally. And who knows? A little tiny barge building business in Greenwich in the 1880s is multinational. I also put Watkins down. This is real troublemaking on my part. Sorry. Watkins, really based in Gravesend, providing tugs. Very interesting history of Watkins, written in the 1920s by Mr. Watkins. I couldn't resist putting the Fighting Temeraire in because Watkins, that of course is Watkins Tug Monarch. What's interesting is all the arty sites I look at say, it's the dirty tug. Turner's contrasted the dirty tug and the magnificent warship. Whereas, I remember a lecturer, Andrew Lambert, who's a professor of something to do with shipbuilding at King's, saying Turner's interest in the tug. It's modern. It's the modern world he's contrasting with the dead old warship. But anyway, it's Watkins Tug Monarch. Watkins were very annoyed, and they go on about the painting in their history of their company, saying that Turner didn't understand anything about tugs at all, and he made a right mess of it. But that's beside the point. They don't quote that in the RT articles. Very quickly, railways. The Upper Watergate was built to be a link with the London and Greenwich Railway. And thank you to Chris and Willie in Sadler's Palace for discovering that very recently. And the Angerstein Railway, which I ought to talk about because the crossing, which is a photograph of, is about to be closed by the railways, and we need to get together on that. Samora Railway is the fast great system at East Greenwich. Crowleys I haven't had time to talk about, but we should take in mind that in the 17th and 18th centuries, there is this massive iron selling wharfage on Angerstein Wharf, which is why it's called Angerstein Wharf. And I'm pretty sure that this building here is a forge. Happily, the archaeologists found the remains of a forge, which we didn't know about before. I've got about 2 more to go. Wharfage, Victoria Deep Water. Important wharf, it's a safeguarding wharf, which the PLA saw as one of the most important wharfs on the river. And just general pictures of factories up against the river, and some pictures, some of which I took of wharfage operations on Lovell's Wharf and what was then Granite Wharf. That's it. Sorry, I got through that last lot at terrific speed. My clock.
Thank you, Mary. That was good. Can you stop sharing the screen, or?
I've got so much more material, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, I could go for another 2 hours, quite honestly. Difficulty at all. As I said, I would be on the whole, I can't see the chat icon.
It's down at the bottom.
I would be grateful.
It's down the bottom. Shall I read them out?
I haven't got a bottom. I can't, yes, I can't see it at all. It's the screen's the wrong shape, I think. No, I haven't got the icon here at all. I know where it should be, it's just not there.
Mary, if you press escape, if you press escape.
I've got it here. Okay. I did lose one of your pictures there, Alan, but I'd done most of it.
Good.
Right. Somebody ran out of Young's Ordinary. Did they say Samuel Enderby lived there because he was dead before it was built? But I think they might say Samuel Enderby lived there.
Shall I read out some of the questions? Can you hear me, Mary?
Dangerous structure, I'm sure. Go on. Can I just say, I've just seen Debbie's thing about the 6th richest town in the country. It's very interesting. If you look at population figures, if you put Deptford and Greenwich together, which of course they would have been in the 18th century, and if you, I forget what you have to do, but it's a bit fiddling the figures, but it is something like in the top 10 biggest areas of population in Britain, and most heavily industrialised in Britain. And that is all written by the anti-industrialisation Professor Hoskins. It's not in the, it's in the first book he did about the local use of local history. But you do have to fiddle about. Local knowledge tells you how to do it.
Okay. Any more questions for anybody? Type them in or unmute your microphone.
Yes, sure. It's always very dispiriting when somebody asks you anything.
Sorry, Mary?
Buy the book when it comes out. I said, I hope they the early gas here. You know, and one might live yeah. No, I'm sure you're right. And you know, no, I mean, I won't say rude things about archaeologists because I know that you defend them, but and are one, but they just don't see them. Very angry about the East Greenwich Tide.
to be fair, if they don't find traces, and often more later works destroy all traces,
Yeah.
then they cannot say that a thing was there. They have to go with actual evidence. And that is where the historians and archaeologists must work together, because documentary information.
I don't know how it
Feed
works, the
gaps.
archaeologists, but honestly, I mean, they don't want to know about you. Because most historians count as amateurs, and they're not interested. I mean, it's quite professional historians, so very few and far between. They tend to be professors.
Any more comments from anyone?
Great talk, Mary. Lovely. Enjoyed it immensely. You could keep on going for me.
I thought it was absolutely fascinating, Mary. Thank you.
I've hardly started the amount of material I've got. And people don't know the Riverside. They come down, they look at the Cutty Sark, they go in the foot tunnel and think it's a public toilet or the Royal Observatory. But there are people that think the foot tunnel is the Royal Observatory. And then they go away again. And I think they've lost so much. But, you can't get the tourist authorities to take any notice of this.
Mm. And it's so unmarked.
Mm. Yeah.
Exactly.
It would be fascinating if they had plaques by the Waterman's Stairs and that sort of thing, explaining what they were rather than just ignoring them.
That's right. I don't know what the PLA are doing at the moment, and it may be. I know that there's something in their new act, and it's something the PLA could do, or the Waterman's Company. And the Waterman's Company can't be poor, can it? I mean, what I didn't say was that all the ferries, there's always in every one of them there's been aggravation of the waterman. I mean, real violent aggravation, not just moaning.
It's a bit like the battle between Uber and the and the cab drivers today, the black cab drivers.
Yeah.
Philip Bin says, we promise to advise on future meetings. Mary, you've booked somebody for July, I think. Who is that?
Yes, I think Mick is here, isn't he? Going to do the three. And then, I can't remember the ones for the autumn. Jackie up there somewhere is going to do something about the Royal Hospital staff. And I've got the Museum of Slavery and Freedom for the first vacancy. I think can't remember, Peter Marshall about his photographs from the 1970s and 60s. I can't remember, I should have written it all down. But the next one is definitely Mick Delap. I hope you're there, Mick, and I hope you're going to say yes. Otherwise I'll have to get on to the museum again.
Yes, Mary.
Is the right answer.
I've always got someone coming from Brunel, incidentally, at some stage in the autumn.
Mick, have you agreed a date? Because it's usually the second Tuesday of the month, which would make it the 13th of July.
That's what Mary told me, the 13th.
Yeah.
So, and if I could just say very quickly that I'm not, if Mary regards historians as amateurs, I'm an amateur, but I have been very involved with Deptford Creek and putting labels on things that are there. So I'll be talking as much about the campaign to try and recognise some of the past as I will the history. I rely on Mary and people like Alan and others to tell me the history, but I've been campaigning to try and preserve and share it. So I'll be talking as much about that as the actual history, which I depend on Mary for.
Mick, I've also been talking to the Creekside Centre, or anxious to have speakers for a series on the centre, on the creek, sometime I think in the autumn. I was going to give them the chat, as Merryweather's, but there are others, of course. If we get a list together.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm seeing Jill, I think, in a couple of weeks. So
Yeah, they've got someone called Sam there now doing the publicity. It's a female Sam.
don't know yet.
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
That's great.
Mary, just a question. Has anybody actually dated the timber on those Deptford embankments that you were mentioning before? Because it can be done, you know. They do take a core sample of the wood and they can be very clever with what they find out.
I can't hear. Can we translate?
Sorry?
I'm sorry, my hearing's so poor I can't.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if anybody has taken a core sample of the timbers on Deptford embankment to see exactly what year they were
The point,
grown in.
yes, the point about them, Julie, it's lovely to see you, and what a terrific book yours is. The point about the timbers and the embanking of the Thames is that it has gone on for millennia, so that it will only date those timbers. It won't necessarily give us a date of the first embanking of the Thames, which could have been very, very early indeed. I'm particularly interested in the prehistoric history of the whole area. And the more one goes into it, the older and older and older it is.
Yeah,
Oh, Greenwich itself, what a fascinating area. Goodness gracious, the history. Oh, incredible.
The timbers on the tide mill.
Yeah, those two you were mentioning.
They were sent up to York. I don't know what's happened to them. The archaeologists won't tell me.
Yes, the timbers of the Greenwich tide mill are the 1190s.
Yeah.
And the trouble is that conservation of timbers, which is what was taking place at York, is a very, very expensive business. But like Mary, I shouldn't get started on that.
It doesn't think it was 12 years ago.
Right. I think we're getting to a natural close. So I want to say thank you very much to Mary. Thank you for a fascinating presentation on the Riverside.
Thank you, Mary.
We will hear a lot more about the Riverside over the coming months, no doubt. And we will hear about Deptford Creek on the 13th of July, which is second Tuesday in July. So Mick, thank you very much for volunteering. And I will say at that point, it's now...
I was volunteered.
You were volunteered. Well done. And thank you for saying yes. Submitting to the moral pressure from Mary Mills. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for a good evening. And it's now nearly 10 to 9 and time for us to go, I think. So thank you very much. See you all next month. Follow us on the Greenwich Industrial History group on Facebook that Mary so excellently maintains. And we'll see you in a few weeks. Thank you very much. And good night to everybody. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Mary. That was fascinating.
Bye. Bye now.
Bye, Mary. Thank you.
Mary. That was great.